Adjunct Professor Moran, Macroeconomics 111. In the prior sessions, we've discussed consumer spending and business spending. Now we're going to combine consumer spending and business spending into aggregate expenditures, then compare the level of aggregate expenditures with gross domestic product to determine the current equilibrium of the economy and determine whether we have a recession, full employment, or inflationary period. We developed consumption by using disposable income as the most important predictor of consumption, and we discovered that consumption didn't go up dollar for dollar with income. That would be the 45 reference line. But consumption went up somewhat more slowly because the slope of the consumption line is the marginal propensity to consume, which is always less than 1. Now, we made some very important assumptions concerning our economy. We assumed that there was no depreciation, all profits were paid out, and there was no government, so there's no taxes, there's no foreign sector, so there's no foreign factor income. That resulted in an assumption that means that gross domestic product is equal to disposable income, which is then either consumed or saved. Savings is a leakage. It's a leakage from the consumption stream. So if you get paid $100 to buy output, to produce output, you may not actually spend $100 to buy the output, because you may save some, and then there'll be unproduced output left over. That's a problem we're going to have to deal with later. For right now, though, we can predict consumption. Here's our 45-degree reference line. And just swap out disposable income for gross domestic product, because we made those powerful assumptions concerning the equality of GDP and disposable income. So I'm just going to take this and get this over here. Very same line. Now we're going to take a look at business spending. And we explain business spending as a negative relationship between how much businesses spend in dollars and how much they have to pay to borrow money to undertake new projects. At a high interest rate, businesses spend very little because that interest rate is a cost, and so it makes many projects look unprofitable. But at a lower interest rate, the cost of borrowing is less, so many business projects look more profitable and business spending will rise. Now, we want to put these two variables together because in our simplified model, we have C plus IG equals GDP in total. We are going to ignore for the moment government spending and exports and imports. So we were able to get disposable income equal to GDP by making simplifying assumptions. Now we need to get IG over here. But there is no way you can make a simplifying assumption that brings interest rates into equality with gross domestic product. So the best we can do is find out whatever interest rate is prevailing in the economy, maybe 5%, and figure out how much business spending will actually occur at that, maybe 100. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say that regardless of changes in GDP, business spending will be fixed at 100. So unless interest rates change, business spending will remain constant at 100, which isn't the same here because we're assuming that just GDP is equal to disposable income. And so at higher levels of disposable income, GDP will rise. And if disposable income falls, GDP will fall. We'll be on this line. But since we can't make a similar assumption between disposable income and GDP, we have to just pick the current level of interest rates in our economy, find out how much that is, and say that's IG. Now we want to get those together. We just built our model such that we have C plus IG, yes, find out what the current value is at each, and now we have GDP on each axis. Since we have like things on this axis, we can just add these two values together. So we're going to draw a 45-degree reference line, and we're going to plunk C on here, whatever this value is. Then we're going to add a constant amount of IG to this line with a slope. If you add a constant amount of one line to a line with a slope, you'll get a parallel line. So this will be C plus IG. Now, the interesting thing about that is since this is a parallel line, the slope of this line, the marginal propensity to consume, equals the slope of this line, the marginal propensity to consume. And that's going to make things easier for us later when we talk about how the government is going to influence how much we're spending on these lines. This is called aggregate expenditures. C plus IG is actually aggregating two unlike variables, consumption spending and business spending. And now we have our relationship between aggregate expenditures and GDP. How much people spend is a positive relationship. How much people spend is a positive relationship between how much society makes and earns. Think of this as buying. Think of this as making. Isn't GDP a measure of output of society, and also income? And there are two approaches to GDP, right? Expense and income. So we now have both forms. We have all measures of GDP. All the definitions of GDP are now on our graph, which is elegant. All right. We've just consolidated our model. And now we can start to, and this will be our current equilibrium. So this will be AE sub-equilibrium. And this will be GDP sub-equilibrium. At equilibrium, the amount we're purchasing will be equal to the amount we're buying. But that may not be the amount of output that generates full employment. And that's our problem to solve. And we'll discuss these equilibriums in the next session.